Welcome to Solved. We make this show because if we don't tell you how to think, someone dumber on the internet will. My name is Jay, and our other resident solvers are Amanda, Deon, and Erin, who will offer a greeting now.
Hey there.
Hello.
How's it going?
Today we are exploring the common downfalls of common sense, tracking the course of fascists who never run out of targets to call evil, and the failure of symbolic politics that open the door for white supremacists to form an unlikely multicultural coalition of ignorant and misled people. But first, a new segment. I have been reading a bit of our old favorites. First, the classic, progressive satire from The Onion, but also their counterpart, the conservatives over at the Babylon Bee. And what I realized recently is that as part of the realignment, de-alignment, like who even can keep track of what's going on with politics, I realized that if I didn't know where headlines were coming from, I couldn't tell anymore. Like I used to be able to tell that the Babylon Bee was the Babylon Bee, and they've started putting out some headlines that I'm like, The Onion could have written that, which then makes me think, what do the writers at the Babylon Bee think satire is? Which is sort of, it's a fundamental question we've been having for a long time, like very much questioning, like, do they understand what jokes they're making? I'm not sure they do, but they've taken a pivot in a way that I'm like, no, they've really completely lost it. So I came up with a new game. It's the segment where we analyze the state of satire. It sucks all the fun out of the humor, but I've turned it into a game, so maybe that's more fun. So welcome to Satire Showdown.
Okay, but the catchy jingle.
Satire Showdown, it's time to play. Can you tell the difference every single day? Onion or bee, which one is the test? Laugh and learn and do your best.
Are we turning into like a music podcast?
God.
So for some reason, I came up with the idea for this game like a week ago, and I came up with the idea to make a song for it 10 minutes before we started recording.
Okay, that makes more sense now.
So we're just going to dive right in. I'm going to give each of you a headline, and you're going to see if you can tell if it's from The Onion or from the Babylon Bee. In no particular order, Amanda, will start with you.
Okay.
The headline is, Trump says recession unfortunate but necessary step to get to depression.
I guess that would be The Onion, but yeah, that's my guess.
You are correct. That was The Onion. I feel like that was sort of, well, I won't give anything away. Deon, I guess we'll just go in the order in which you all say hello. The next headline is, checkmate, Trump hits Canada with tariff of double infinity plus one.
That sounds like the Babylon Bee.
It is the Babylon Bee. What do you think the satire
Checkmate.
is there?
No, checkmate. That's the satire. They just use the word checkmate.
Okay. Yeah, because I don't know if the writers of the Babylon Bee also think that the tariff trade war is bad and stupid and they're mocking it, or like I can't quite follow the thread, but maybe checkmate is just a funny word.
That's where I'm going with.
Okay.
Well, I was like, definitely the infinity plus one. It's like a kid comeback.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's not satire.
No, it's
that's
not.
just propaganda.
Yeah. All right. Erin, headline for you. Russia says it will agree to ceasefire as soon as it's done conquering Ukraine.
Of course, I want to say The Onion because it actually doesn't sound childish. Ugh. All right, I'm going The Onion.
That was also the Babylon Bee.
Ah, damn.
Really?
Yeah.
What are they doing over there?
I
So
don't
now
know.
that one, I got Deon's and Amanda's. That one, I
was
can't even
tough.
guess. Yeah, what?
Yeah.
Maybe they think it's stupid that they would have to even pretend to do a ceasefire because they're like, obviously Russia should win, so why should they do a ceasefire?
Yeah.
It's as good a guess as any.
any.
Yeah. Mostly for fun. One more round for each of you. Amanda, J.D. Vance's French horn solo booed at Kennedy Center.
Oh God, I hope that's the Onion.
Yeah, that was the Onion.
Because it was funny.
Well, yeah, mostly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, mine still wasn't badly written. It just isn't the satire that I would assume they were going for.
Erin's gonna be thinking about this for days.
I know. It's gonna live in my thoughts rent free.
All right. This one is, like, granted, almost impossible to do over audio, but we're doing it anyway. So, Deon, the headline is disturbing. If you remove the O in Obama and replace the B with an S and the M with a T and add an N at the end, it spells Satan.
I'm going to go with the B again.
It is the B because the Onion wouldn't write something that
it's so
clunky.
convoluted. Yeah.
It's super convoluted, but the satire is
joke is-
clearly anti-conspiracy theory, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Which they're all on board with most of the
No,
time.
I think they're just saying Obama's Satan, and it's very straightforward
And
and not satire.
And the funny part is we're making a funny conspiracy out of it, but actually he's just Satan.
Yeah.
Or funny, I use that in air quotes, obviously.
right. Yeah. So the article goes on to say, we knew Barack Obama was the worst, but this disturbing new revelation just proves it. And then goes on from there.
That is
So, like,
Is this from this year?
this is from like this week.
super relevant, obviously.
I just saw them. Yeah.
Okay. Is there a sleeper agent over there?
I don't know.
9 years ago, he was president. And he's been a Netflix producer ever since. Like, what?
To me, the satire, being a liberal listening to it, like, I would be like, oh, they're like making a point at the effort in which to villainize and blame Obama is like being executed on. But
Right.
it's Babylon B, so
I kind of wonder if they're just writing things that they think will reach more broadly to like
Maybe.
try to pull people into the fold. I don't know if
So-
they're that thoughtful. It's hard to know.
we're giving more thought than they did.
SEO satire?
Right, SEO satire, yeah.
All right, Erin, you get the last one. RFK Jr. claims measles can be cured with a good concealer.
Amanda laughed.
Amanda laughed.
Duh.
I'm afraid to go the Onion though. I've already got one wrong. Oh no, my competitiveness.
So much pressure.
I don't know. I'm still gonna go with the Onion because even if I'm wrong, it proves the point.
Yeah, you are correct. That was the Onion.
Okay, shoot.
And you can tell because we laughed.
I mean, it might as well be concealer. That's the funny part.
Not too much of a stretch.
Vi-
Yeah.
Vitamin A or concealer do about the same when it comes to measles.
I think all of this is indicative of our first discussion about common sense because, you know, we've been saying for a decade that satire is dead. And I think that a lot of satire sort of depends on a version of common sense where like you kind of like you get the premise, it's pretty clear. And then the satire sort of like stirs it up a bit. Now we've completely lost the thread on common sense. And a few writers have caught on to this. So the first quote I'm going to read is from the New York Times, where we first came across this, but we're actually going to hear more from a different article in The Conversation to have this discussion, but the Times says, in the political arena, common sense is seductive, offering solutions that are both simple and obvious, not just acceptable to the people, but emanating from them. It can often be right, but its rightness does not fully account for its allure. Common sense manages to be knee-jerk and authoritative at once, satisfying precisely because it seems so self-evident. Something becomes common sense not when we thoroughly understand it, but when we just know it, which is the perfect recipe for whatever you already believe is the definition of common sense. You don't have to understand basically anything, but whatever you just know to be true is true.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it kind of reminded me of something that we talked about. I think it was Amanda who brought up reframing, where someone on Twitter, in the Twitterverse, I'm not calling it X, I'm still one of those people, who made the comment of like, oh yeah, it's not immigrants who are causing all these issues, it's the billionaires. And like, they were doing that as a like, haha, of course it's the immigrants. But like, reading that and the common sense that I think they tried to say was there, to me, pinpointed exactly this, that people follow their common sense to bad ideas all the time.
Yeah. And that's the mirror world version of reality.
Yeah.
Also.
There's a town hall recently, I can't remember which Republican Congress person, but he said sarcastically to the crowd, oh, so you think taxing the billionaires is the solution to our debt and deficit? And the whole crowd yelled back at him, yes! And he was very confused, because it's obviously common sense that you need to cut more taxes. Like, the taxes are too high on the billionaires. Common sense.
We've been stifling them, in fact.
Yeah.
See, we
Set
know
'em
how
free.
to do satire and sarcasm.
Oh boy. Yeah, so switching to the other article from The Conversation, how populist leaders like Trump use, quote, common sense as an ideological weapon to undermine facts, which really sort of just lays it all out right there. It gives this explanation this way. It says, common sense is what's known to scholars as lay epistemology, or how regular people make sense of the world. We don't rely on statistical evidence or expert research while we're buying lettuce or driving in traffic. Instead, we're guided by direct experience, emotions, and intuition. Because it comes from regular people and not institutions that some people deem to be corrupt, champions of common sense suggest it leads to a purer form of truth. And then it clarifies, yet it is precisely because it comes from personal observations and intuition that research shows common sense is steeped in bias and often leads us astray. Populist leaders like Trump commonly celebrate common sense and attack expertise and evidence. Because obviously. But yeah, I mean, we're sort of getting to the core of the do your own research style of truth finding. So this literally just came to me, but there's the dumb left version of understanding international dynamics. And they always start with the premise that, well, the US is not just bad, but they're the worst. And they're not just the worst, but they've been like the source of every problem that's ever happened. And I'm going to start from there and then build my argument or ideas about any given current events based on that premise. And this, like, starting with the premise that experts and institutions can't be trusted, and therefore the only thing you can trust is what you can come up with on your own, doing your own research, is like, holy shit, how often are you going to end up thinking and acting on really, really stupid ideas not based in like any level of reality.
The other thing about the way the right is using this phrase right now, because like we discussed, I don't know how many episodes back, there are so many words now that have lost their meaning. And this is another one, because common sense really, is the idea of like, you should look both ways before you cross the street because you might get run over by a bus if you don't, right? That's common sense. It was supposed to, or at least the way I have interpreted it for my whole life previously, it has been about doing things that are the basic requirements to not die or or to like just be at the status quo. Like what it is now instead is a consensus. That's how they're using that word. This is the consensus. We've all decided these policies are what we need to be doing, and therefore that's common sense. That's a bizarre way to use that word, but it's part of the authoritarian playbook to make everyone else who does not agree with those policy decisions seem like the other and the out group. And like they love doing that, in and out, in and out. We have common sense, you don't. We know what's right for the country, you don't. And if you don't agree with us, you are lacking the basic understandings of how this world works.
Well, and I definitely agree with you of like how common sense to me has existed. Like there's a difference between common sense to know if it's safe crossing the street and common sense of deciding policy to run an entire country on. Like those are drastically different things that shouldn't call for the same thing. Like common sense should not be the driver. Expertise, professionals, research, like those are the drivers to making those larger decisions. Again, your day-to-day and survival, like, yeah, sometimes you got to use some common sense. But even that, I mean, usually is passed down to your parents, and you know that crossing the street when a car is coming probably puts your life in danger. Like that is something that you can deduce. But again, running a country, like we shouldn't use the same tools.
You know what I would say about running a country? None of it is common.
There we go. Yep.
No one runs countries in their everyday lives, and they're like, well, I mean, I've been doing this my whole life. I know how this stuff works.
Yeah,
Come on.
This is basic.
Yeah.
So I worked at Panera years ago, and we would break people's brains when we were out of soup because they'd be like, don't you just go to the back and make more? And I was like, oh, you're so cute. Like we had a running joke of like, oh, these idiots here think we make the soup in the back, like that, how any of that works. The amount of people I've informed about microwave usage, even in restaurants, like right now might be common knowledge, 10 years ago was not. So yeah, like I think there are a lot of gaps in knowledge, and this may go back to Jay, where it's like we don't story tell enough. So you don't know the inner workings of different professions and things like that, but you think you do. Like people who pull up to Panera, they thought they knew exactly how it operated. You cooked the soup in the back and you brought it out front to serve. Like in reality, very far from how it worked. There's a factory involved, shipping, like there's way more background things that are going on.
Common sense, make my soup.
Yeah. And like, of course that's removed from politics, but like we would say, oh, this is a silly matter for people to have common sense about. Yeah. Then imagine how silly it is to translate that to politics.
And this article then goes on to explain why not only are we going to start with bad premises and be confronted with information that does not match what we previously believed, but the way our intuition works does not lend itself to updating our information, or at least our worldview. So it says, our intuition rarely tells us we're wrong. This helps account for the existence of confirmation bias, which is our tendency to see and remember things that tell us we're right. This is also why, even in those rare instances when facts change minds, they rarely change hearts. If we do update our knowledge with correct information, research has shown that our gut will still tell us our overall view of the world was right, which reminds me of probably my favorite comic strip is called F-. And my favorite one of F- just shows a couple sitting on the couch watching TV. And the guy says, you know what's impressive about me? I've changed my mind about a variety of issues over the years, yet at no point have I ever been wrong.
No.
Impressive.
Well, this use of common sense in this is like, as Amanda was saying, like consensus. number one, that's not true either. Like, none of this is consensus. Like, there
Right.
is no majority opinion on most of the things that are happening right now. It's a very small minority of people who agree, or even if they do know what's happening right now, would agree. But the merging of unbridled confidence with ignorance seems to
Mhm.
be the common sense of this party that we're dealing with right now. Just confidently wrong about everything, can't be told that they're wrong about anything. And, you know, I guess reality will show them that they're wrong over the course of hopefully not too long. We're all going to suffer because this inability to say, yeah, I don't really know. My uncle worked for NASA. He was a payload engineer. He worked on the space shuttle, getting things into the space shuttle. That was his area of expertise. He would have never said he was a rocket scientist or knew how to get the shuttle or could work on anything else having to do with the space shuttle. And he was the smartest person I've ever known. However, like, we've got millions of people just assuming that Elon Musk can do everything. He's an expert on telecommunications and rocket launching and just everything. Because they like him, they're kind of experts too, you know? Like, yeah, I know how all this works. I'm right now talking to 3 people in different locations around the country on a magic box that I couldn't make work if my life depended on it. But, you know, I guess I'm right about everything else. Like, this, it's really tough to just say honestly that all of us are mostly ignorant about everything. We have small little bands of knowledge and they overlap with each other, and we need everyone to make all that collective knowledge work. But that's scary. So just pretend you know everything, and then you feel safe, I guess.
Hey, Deon, I didn't know your uncle worked for NASA. I think I've learned from Trump that if your uncle
Oh my
like,
God.
went to MIT or
Yeah,
something, like
yeah.
his brains directly go to you. So that's pretty impressive. We didn't know
Well,
that.
it was uncle by marriage, so I'm still stupid, I guess.
Oh,
Trump would count it.
close
Yeah.
miss.
Yeah.
There were a couple of things in there you said, Deon, that, like, I feel bad picking at, but, like, you sort of phrased that your uncle wouldn't call himself an expert on other parts of the space shuttle, and he was one of the smartest people you've ever met. But it's like, right, that's why he's one of the smartest people.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
And, and then the other thing was, you're like, well, I guess reality will show these people that they're wrong over some time horizon. And I was just like, like COVID-19 is in bold in the next quote I have queued up. And I was just like, yeah, I guess, like, ask those dying patients who were denying the existence of
Well, maybe
COVID
not
with their dying
show
breath.
these people that they were wrong, but history will show that they were wrong.
Right.
Cold
right.
comfort, but
And they will never, and they won't acknowledge it.
okay. I mean, yeah, I have a whole quote on here. It's like the least surprising quote of all time about how people who believe more in intuition and emotion are more likely to like Donald Trump and, misbelieve COVID-19 information. I'm not going to bother reading that because it's common sense.
Because common sense.
It's obviously common sense. Yeah. I just started reading Nexus by Yuval Noah Harari. It's his latest book. And he describes how populists often describe the world as divided into the corrupt elite versus the pure people.
Mhm.
Pure people, not to be confused with like white supremacy, but there's probably a lot of overlap there. And just the idea that the people can be intrinsically trusted to know what's true and correct, and elite and experts can't. And so he says, this is just in the introduction, he says, present day populists also suffer from the same incoherence that plagued radical anti-establishment movements in previous generations. If power is the only reality, and if information is just a weapon, what does it imply about the populists themselves? Are they too interested only in power? And are they too lying to us to gain power? And, obviously, yes. Obviously, I want to emphasize how clear that should be to people. And then he goes on and says, this is like one strategy that populists use. It says, one strategy calls on people to put their trust into charismatic leaders like Trump and Bolsonaro, who are depicted by their supporters as either messengers of God or as possessing a mythical bond with the people. While ordinary politicians lie to the people in order to gain power for themselves, the charismatic leader is the infallible mouthpiece of the people who exposes all the lies. One of the recurrent paradoxes of populism is that it starts by warning us that all human elites are driven by dangerous hunger for power, but often ends by entrusting all power to a single ambitious human. Oops.
Yeah.
Humans aren't good at this.
This is different. We're actually entrusting it to two this time around. We've got the not charismatic, most elite person on earth by financial standards, and the charismatic goofball who lies all the time. So it's a two-headed monster.
Is that what the founders meant when they were describing the balance of powers?
Yep, this is separation of power.
Okay, good.
I mean, it's kind of a perfect system because then nothing has to be your fault. Like, it could always be that person's fault.
There's always someone to pass buck to.
Yeah, I mean, there's you have to think there's wings of the Republican Party that like Trump can point to Elon and they'll be like, yeah, fuck that guy. But like disconnect that Trump has the power to kick him out of the government. You know what I mean? Like scapegoat, I don't know, but we need him because also XYZ, like if we're using common sense, he's just going to then weaponize it against you to lead you to agree with him.
Yeah, later on we'll get to the flexibility of the Republican Party and how it offers all sorts of space for such things, right?
Yeah.
They are so flexible.
So flexible. Did we emphasize, I mean, I know Jay gave an introduction at the top, but I really wanted to make sure we put this in the context of like the common sense thing isn't just something they say now and then. It's like the core of the administration. And I had heard Trump say during the campaign, common sense, but it didn't stand out enough. Now, though, now that they are in office, the memos that come from the White House, that's in the headline, like along with a list of everything they've done that they think is common sense, like making English the language of the land. And, it's all sorts of other stuff that has nothing to do with common sense, like making Gulf of Mexico, Gulf of America, all that stuff. They're like, these are all the common sense things we've done. And not only that, but they have all of their talking heads, including Caroline Leavitt, saying common sense constantly. Like it's in the reason this came up as a topic is because I had been reading articles about various issues, all different things. And she just is constantly saying, this is a common sense approach. This is common sense government, blah, 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 blah. And so it's not just a word that they've twisted. It's the core of their whole approach to government right now.
I wouldn't be surprised if this is what they came up with in response to being called weird.
Probably.
Because common sense is the anti-weird. And I mean, one of the many failures of the Harris campaign was abandoning that talking point when it was working so well. And I mean, I guess there was the argument that it could have worn out its welcome, whatever. But this talking point about everything they do now is common sense is so clearly an effort to make all of their bizarro world weird ideas sound normal to people who don't pay that close of attention that it almost sounds like a response.
Isn't it also like a little bit of a distraction? And I'm not saying they haven't used common sense pretty widely, but a lot of like the memos you reference and stuff, they're all things that are kind of going on in the forefront, like making English the language. There's only two genders, like things like that. They're simultaneously just gutting the government and, doing all the things that they've wanted, but putting like that common sense factor of like the everyday person, like focus on these things that are common sense. Don't look at, all this background. So just when you were talking, that like struck me that like it also seems a little bit like a distraction. Like, look at all of these check marks we're making in the common sense realm while we do a lot of things that go against common sense in the background.
Which brings us to the other way common sense is being used. This is from The Atlantic, the age of anti-woke overreach. But it starts with, after a Black Hawk helicopter collided with a passenger jet in January, the president launched into a public broadside saying it was common sense that DEI in hiring air traffic controllers was at least in part responsible for the crash. And so, that's the other way is, you can use it as a shield or as a weapon just as easily. And common sense, as with everything in Trump world, is just what Trump believes.
Obviously, what they think is common sense is racism, prejudice, just bigotry. Obviously, like, that's the way he thinks about the world. It must be common. It's just telling you what the person who's saying it thinks about the world. And that's his worldview. He's a racist. He's a sexist. He's a misogynist. He's all the things. And he thinks everyone else is, because he's also a narcissist and incapable of empathy and thinking that other people might have different views about things.
So the article goes on. I mean, we are pivoting away from the common sense topic and diving more into the DEI. And the main point of this article is to point out how absolutely not common sense it is to be anti-DEI, no matter what the onslaught of the administration might have you believe. So it says, given the way this administration has targeted DEI and woke policies, you'd be forgiven for assuming that Americans were completely on board. Or I'll interject, completely on board. I mean, obviously it's not going to be complete, but you might think like, yeah, they've convinced a large majority of people that all this stuff is a bad idea. Yet, the article continues, according to a Pew Research Center poll conducted right before the election, just 1/5 of employed adults think that focusing on DEI at work is a bad thing. Even among workers who are Republican or lean Republican, a minority, 42%, say that focusing on DEI is a bad thing. And at some point in the article, it points out, like, remember, that was before the election. We hadn't even seen the wrecking crew come in and use DEI as an excuse to try to dismantle the government, which is obviously making the public opinion about that approach go down by the day.
I think this reiterates the point about the failure of messaging with the Democratic Party and how they've strayed away from the working class. Like, there is a reason why they're seen as elitist, and that a lot of the messaging doesn't resonate with working class people. I think because, like, simple messaging means that it's understood. You can use things like common sense to connect the dots. To me, this was like a call in, right? Like, Democrats have to start listening to the working class and being receptive to them and working on their messaging so that it's reaching them. Because I do feel like a little bit, and I mean, we've tracked, right, how urban areas especially, because money moved in, because industry changed drastically, the Democratic Party kind of went along with elites, even if they pandered to different minority groups within. But like, what we're seeing now is that we weren't, as Democrats, we weren't responsive to working class people. We weren't responsive to the minority groups that we thought were locked in voting wise. And like, now common sense a little bit has played into like voting against your true beliefs. Because I do agree with what the poll found. I don't think that most people, like, that was the thing that was having them vote for Trump. It was different messaging. It's sad to me and disappointing because these are electorates that should have naturally gone to Democrats if they did the work of establishing themselves in areas and messaging to the working class.
And this is like, the messaging point is like a huge part of it to me. Clarence Thomas used to be kind of a black radical, right? And he was shaped into the person he is over time because of resentment about affirmative action and the idea that he would get a job, or black people would get a job, because of affirmative action, because the messaging was terrible and easy to pollute. And it's the same thing with DEI. It's easy to say, well, this person is just a DEI hire, because it doesn't have the message behind it, what DEI or affirmative action actually means. Instead of just saying, we actually want to create the meritocracy that we're headed towards. We want the best and the brightest. Connecting best and brightest to Black, brown people, white, women, ethnic minorities of all kinds, just like connecting the idea that they too can have merit, as opposed to we have to do this for them because they aren't worthy. It's so easy to switch because the word meritocracy has its own meaning, and it's been almost solidified in right-wing minds that white male is merit and everybody else is lesser, so we have to do these things to make them equal, as opposed to these systems that are in place have kept people from actually reaching the top because they do have the merit. They are maybe the right person for the job, but they have been oppressed by systems. And the Democratic Party has never made that connection and kind of does these cutesy things around the edges without ever saying, we have a white supremacist system. We have to dismantle the white supremacist system. We have a patriarchal system. We have to dismantle the patriarchy and make things actually merit-based.
Counterpoint, Amy Coney Barrett was appointed by Donald Trump. And we know that Donald Trump hates DEI and would never do anything that was not in line with the meritocracy. So what do you have to say about that?
I have to say that maybe she's just a DEI hire. And even Donald Trump can fall victim to the weakness that is DEI.
Oh boy, what sources have you been reading?
I do want to, I guess, pose a question here. That data was very broad. Like, it didn't dive into socioeconomic levels or the types of jobs that people had. And I would guess that people in corporate jobs where those DEI initiatives are actually being put into place and have been put into place, that those people are probably much more receptive to it because they've seen that these things have been implemented and their lives didn't change. In fact, maybe they got better people joining their teams and things were going quite well. But if you dive into the socioeconomic details, and again, I don't know because this data did not do that, I would guess that those who are not experiencing DEI initiatives are the ones that hate it the most, who don't work for companies where it is actually taking place, because they are much more receptive to a "this is happening out there" kind of message, right? And even if it doesn't affect them deeply, it's their underlying racism and sexism and misogyny that is being targeted. And it's easy to latch on to something like that, especially when it's not happening to you, because you can just say, look at all these corporations who maybe didn't hire me because I don't have a college degree, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and how bad they're being to people like me, right? Like, it's a whole deep psychological twist. And I mean, again, I'm just posing a theory here, but I would make that guess.
I think it's a solid guess because you're reminding me of a completely unrelated study that came to basically that conclusion on anti-immigration, that the people who were the most anti-immigrant were the ones who lived in the most homogenous white communities,
Right,
and did not actually integrate or interact with immigrants in almost any way. To wrap up this article, though, the argument being made is that because the anti-DEI push by the Trump administration is so not actually believed or supported by the general public, that they may sort of go too far and elicit a backlash. But I really just have to get in this last quote from the article. It says, "There are signs, in fact, that extremists on the right know their moment might be short-lived. One recent anecdote was telling. A top banker was gloating to the Financial Times." And by the way, I had heard this quote in a different article somewhere, but I didn't get the context of it. But here it points out the top banker says, "I feel liberated. We can say retard and pussy without the fear of getting canceled. It's a new dawn. But the article writer points out, I was struck by the performative contradiction. The quote was anonymous. It's like, oh, that's the beautiful detail that I was missing before. I didn't realize that while gloating about the new dawn of not being canceled, that they would insist on being quoted anonymously.
Yeah. And yet this is exactly what the Trump administration is trying to change. So like right now, that person still actually doesn't feel totally comfortable putting their name out there for all the obvious common sense reasons. But, you know, the instance of rehiring that mediocre white guy in his 20s who spouted blatantly racist shit and hateful shit online, and then Vance saying like his life shouldn't be ruined, and they rehired him back in. Like, it was notable that Vance was the one to come to his defense, because actually his tweets were disparaging of marrying outside his race and normalizing hate for people of Vance's wife's heritage. But like the white guy to white guy magnanimous rescue, that whole thing was orchestrated to show it's okay. You can say whatever you want. Put your name on it. It's fine. Put your face out there. It's fine. We will come and rescue you, and we're going to change the culture. The problem is, you can have that on a federal level and like try to get people to say more and more stuff. We still live in a country where that's not acceptable, and it's going to take a long time before that is not the case. But they are trying. Boy, are they going to try.
And that, I mean, this is a project. Like this is,
Yeah.
it's, I mean, you can call it conspiracy, but like they have a plan. You can go read it. Project 2025. It exists. This is a long-term plan to reinstall cultural norms, that there is a hierarchy and there is a pecking order, and it is okay to say the R word. It is okay to be offensive to the people who are below you on the hierarchy. And that's the goal. That they know it's going to be a process, and they're going to try.
I mean, some might argue that the person who made that quote used common sense not to reveal who they are, because they realized that there's still backlash that can happen, whether the government is, I don't know, what they're trying to do about not being able to protest or, you know, boycott certain industries because of their behaviors. But as of right now, you would feel those effects, so you used common sense and decided to keep your mouth shut. Maybe we need more of that. I don't
know. I can't believe I forgot the article that was coming up next when I made that Amy Coney Barrett comment. The Guardian just has this like news piece. She is evil, Amy Coney Barrett under attack by right wing after USAID ruling. So here's the, top headlines here. Amy Coney Barrett, the Donald Trump appointed conservative Supreme Court justice, has been branded a DEI judge by furious right-wing figures after she voted to reject Trump's attempt to freeze nearly $2 billion in foreign aid. The reaction from pro-Trump right-wing commentators and activists was swift. She is evil, chosen solely because she checked identity politics boxes. Another DEI hire. It always ends badly. Mike Cernovich, a prominent right-wing influencer and conspiracy theorist, said. Mark Levin on Fox News said that Barrett had deceived people into thinking she was a reliable constitutionalist, and added that the power had gone to her head. It happens with frightening regularity the last half century. And then Laura Loomer, who we know always gets to the basement and keeps digging, posted a picture of Coney Barrett's family, which includes 2 adopted Black children, and wrote, Amy Coney Barrett was a DEI appointee.
Yeah, not thinly veiled.
Yeah.
First of all, I could not laugh harder at that Mark Levine quote. Like, it happens with frightening regularity the last half century. Oh my God, that's fucking hilarious. Like, yeah, women have let all our power go to our head. Men have been chilling, sipping margaritas on the beach, not abusing their power at all. Yeah.
Not having heard the quote in context, my guess is that he's referring to Souter. And I'm doing this off the top of my head, but Deon's nodding, so we're probably right that Souter was appointed by Reagan and then turned into a liberal.
Yeah.
And then probably the same with Sandra Day O'Connor, that was appointed as a conservative, and then she probably didn't vote with them every single time.
Yeah. Frightening regularity.
Right.
Yeah.
Both times. Well, I mean,
and like occasionally, like what was really the percentage? Like, I mean, here's the thing. They're so close. And this is always the case. They're so fucking close. She wasn't qualified to be a Supreme Court justice. That is actually true. That was one of the big criticisms when he appointed her. So she's got less experience than most people who have been appointed to the Supreme Court. So her appointment had to do with the expectation that she would be a good foot soldier. I mean, that was the whole reason, right? And the fact that she was a woman, sure, bonus, because Republicans like to push their own identity politics in reaction to the fact that the country actually has evolved to a place where women are in positions of power. So they know they have to do that. But also every expectation was she would do his bidding. And she has. That's what's so crazy. Like, they're ripping her to shreds. She helped overturn Roe v. Wade. She helped give Trump unbelievable king-like powers. She did a lot of the bidding. And it wouldn't be shocking to me if she felt like, okay, I kind of did my job now, and maybe I need to show some independence here. I don't understand the psychology of the Supreme Court and being on the Supreme Court, but that is apparently a very important thing to a lot of judges, that they want to show that they are independent even after they've been appointed partisanly. So, I mean, you want to call her DEI hire and throw her under the bus the second she doesn't fall in line. Okay.
That's exactly what you described as she was supposed to be a foot soldier, just loyal to a T. Neil Gorsuch or Brett Kavanaugh could have done exactly the same thing, and there probably wouldn't have been a word about it on social media. Just a little, that kind of sucks. We're disappointed in them. Moving on. Because they get to make their own decisions. They get to have autonomy. She doesn't.
Yeah.
And, it's ironic, like you said, she literally is not qualified, but the first person that they would call a DEI hire is the most qualified Supreme Court justice probably ever, Ketanji Brown Jackson. And that has been thrown at her over and over again, that she's not qualified, that she shouldn't be there, when literally her qualifications are better than probably anybody that's ever been appointed before. Mm-hmm. And I hope that Coney Barrett notices that the second she stepped out of line, she's in that category.
Right.
And, Laura Loomer can't possibly notice because, she's Laura Loomer. But to all the women who are defending these people, you're next on the list. Like, your job ultimately, Laura Loomer's job ultimately will be to shut the fuck up and not be on Twitter or anywhere talking about anything. That's gonna be your job in the future.
Yeah. Actually, your point about how if this was one of the other justices who were male, that this wouldn't happen. I mean, it kind of did, because Roberts pushed back on Trump's insane Truth Social post about impeaching a judge who ruled against him. And Roberts came out and it's so funny because these judges say things and they sound so bland, but I guess it was a big deal. And so it was like a real rebuke, saying we have appellate systems for a reason. Basically, we don't need to impeach judges, right? If you don't like their decision. And we'll see. I'm sure some people are angry at him, but are they calling him derogatory names? No.
They're angry at him and they're disappointed at him and they think better of him, but he's not a DEI hire. He still should be in charge. He should just do better.
Yeah.
I was all set to go on a tirade about when will white women learn, and then Deon kind of made me feel a little empathy, a little bad for her, because you're right, she can't move with autonomy in the same way without the critiques. It will be interesting to see which way she goes, though. Is this an eye opener, or is this just a nudge so that she gets back in line?
Yeah, I don't think she's going to transform. Like I think I said earlier before we got on the call, I don't think she's going to become some, liberal hero. I think she is actually probably trying to exert some sort of independence. And I mean, Roberts has been trying to show his quote unquote independence to some degree. And they don't want their super, super powerful positions to be undermined by just thinking that they're, that they are the foot soldiers that they were put there to be. So I think she probably has more nuanced views, as people are nuanced, right? So like she voted on a like environmental decision and joined the liberals. So there are going to be things that she runs into. And so I think she maybe is testing her limits here.
But her religious background is going to be that grounding.
Totally.
Because I do think that is innate in her views of the world and how it operates and how she would like it to operate.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of the environmental ruling that Amanda just mentioned, did anyone catch the perfect metaphor that closed out this article? It says, talking about before she voted on the USAID thing that everyone got mad at, it says, she had sided with liberal justices to deny Trump's request to delay sentencing in his New York hush money case and joined a dissent against a conservative-led decision that weakened rules on the discharge of raw sewage. And I thought, what a beautiful metaphor. The conservatives want to be able to discharge as much raw sewage as they would like. And she was like, I don't know that that's a good idea. And people got mad at her.
That's a good metaphor.
All right, and we're wrapping today with a conversation about Trump and the rise of the multiracial right. This article from In These Times. And we're coming back to our old friend Steve Bannon because he's so indicative of the mirror world and the ability to sort of play with it, I think. Like, some people live in the mirror world, but Steve Bannon is helping create the mirror world. And so that's why he comes up a lot. And so the article is talking about how Steve Bannon is like able to play both sides. And so as part of his anti-Musk and apparently maybe anti-Peter Thiel crusade, he described South Africans as the most racist people in the world and described Silicon Valley as an apartheid state. And so then the article points out that co-opting the language of Black solidarity while repurposing Reaganite racist misogyny to attack white male elites, then turning around to throw a fascist salute the next month, Bannon is an old hand at remixing race and class in ways that disorient progressive critics. Do you all feel disoriented by that? I empathize.
I'm not disoriented. I wanted to propose this on air that I want to branch off and start a maybe Best of the Right podcast, because I think I agree with Bannon all the time. And he's I think I want to follow him because he's making so much sense.
Common sense.
And if you're right about one thing, clearly you're
right about
everything. I see you.
So we're trying to get in the habit of repeating ourselves more often. For the whole time I've been doing Best of the Left, I in the back of my head, I'm like, oh, but I've already covered that. Should I do that again? And you have to realize that the only way to get information across is to repeat it over and over and over and over and over again. So we've already discussed Naomi Klein's explanation of Pippicism, but it is basically like core to our era of political debate. So it bears repeating. And the word Pippicism comes from Philip Roth's book, Operation Shylock, in which Roth meets his own doppelganger, which is why it gets mentioned in Naomi Klein's book, Doppelganger. It's very, confusing, fractal of discussions, because that's the world we live in. But anyway, Philip Roth wrote a book in which there is a character, Philip Roth, who is basically him, and the fictional Philip Roth meets an even more fictional doppelganger who also goes by the name Philip Roth. So the character Philip Roth in the book doesn't like that, doesn't like this doppelganger character who's like mimicking everything he does and sort of devaluing him as an individual, right? And so he calls this character Pippic. And Pippic is an old like Hebrew word that you would call a naughty child. So that's where Pippic comes from. I don't know how to use it without giving the full explanation every time because it's, such an unknown word. But anyways, the PIPIC gets described as the force that inconsequentializes everything, farcicalizes everything, trivializes everything, superficializes everything. And so what she's getting at with drawing attention to this phenomenon is that common sense itself has been pipicked. We've mentioned that Steve Bannon has tried to take over the word othering, which is a classic word to describe the impact on minority communities who usually are othered by like oppressive regimes or social structures, much to their detriment. And so he's like, great, I'll use that to describe how conservatives are not liked, just because they're fascist and racist white supremacists. And he's upset about that. And so he describes his own group as being othered, but common sense in general is like falling to this phenomenon. And so actually going back to that New York Times article about common sense, it says, Trump doesn't want to do things just because they are common sense. He also calls things common sense just because he wants to do them. The more unorthodox or radical his positions, the more he coats them in that soothing balm. And I also pulled this example, same article, talking about January 6th. It says, reminded that some of his supporters had chanted, "Hang Mike Pence" that day, Trump offered his default explanation, quote, because it's common sense, John. It's common sense that you're supposed to protect. How can you, if because he's talking like Trump, how can you, if you know a vote is fraudulent, right? How can you pass on a fraudulent vote to Congress? End quote. It's common sense that you would murder someone in Congress if they don't do what you think they should do. Like, common sense.
I don't think that he wants us to utilize common sense like that. It is not going to be a good outcome.
You might be onto something. So anyway, the bulk of this article gets into a conversation with the co-authors of the book, Producers, Parasites, Patriots, a 2019 book that grappled with the Trump coalition's ability to mobilize constituencies of color. And so one of the authors says, we tracked the many inroads this is happening through: religion, gender, militarism, immigration enforcement, appeals to entrepreneurialism, and frustrations over public institutions. There's not one story that accounts for the return of many people of color toward the right. So, I think baseline, that's what we need to understand. There is no magic silver bullet or anything like that. It's like, just the one thing that's tricking all of these people. That's not the case. It's a widespread and multifaceted phenomenon that people of color are voting for a white supremacist.
You mean to tell me that BIPOC voters are not a monolithic group?
Yeah,
Learn something new every day.
And I think, as we've all thought or discussed many times, like, people who vote for Republicans are usually voting against their own interests. So why can't Black and brown people also vote against their own interest?
Yes.
Let's not be racist. Let's not put people in a box. You too can do stupid shit.
Honestly, though, Deon, that was the thought. I was like, this kind of shows a little bit of the mindset in the Democratic Party that, like, is based in racism, where they might make a remark about Black people specifically voting against their own interests. And I'm sure if you talk through the arguments, they would get to also, lower class people, things like that, are also voting against. But it's not talked about in the exact same way. And I think that, as white people, you get to be multifaceted. You get to be in these different groups. Whereas BIPOC, it is one. And that thought that you just articulated, it was through this entire thing.
When BIPOC communities vote against or stop voting with the Democratic Party, there is an anger that is really disturbing that comes from the Democrats. and Democratic voters, not just the politicians, and probably more from the Democratic voters, honestly, especially in this very online world. You see it a lot. I think there was one line here that kind of like said it all. The alienation and sheer disgust with what they perceive as the stasis of contemporary politics is so sharp that they're alongside much of the hardcore MAGA base in being quite willing to watch things get dismantled and attacked. That's the Venn diagram we should have seen coming. Like, that's not surprising at all. The left continues with the status quo and a shit ton of lip service. Like, what do you expect? Some people are going to want a progressive revolution, sure, and maybe they won't vote for Democrats because of that. And some would obviously turn towards the nihilist burn it all down approach. Totally. And then some percentage of them will actually like fully believe. But we do know there is a lot of existing conservative ideology for a segment of Black and Latino men and sexism. It's not like these things don't exist in those populations. So we just should not be surprised, I guess is the point, right?
No, and people don't have to pick one of those groups you just described. They can flow between them. There's a quote in the article talking about people going to the Turning Point USA conference, and the co-authors says, we met people that talked about being drawn to Bernie Sanders or other projects in the past, and now they feel like this is a space to go if you want to feel energetic and dynamic, but also like you're a dissident.
Ooh, that one really punched me in the stomach.
Which is something that we really need to look into, because that clearly is the vibe. Like Charlie Kirk talks about it all the time. It's really punk rock to be Republican, which is so ridiculous to me. I cannot understand it, but maybe they are offering something like that, and that's something we should not discount. And there's this idea, like the Black conservatives often say, like getting off the Democratic plantation, and it's inflammatory, it's derogatory, but it's also comes with a little bit of truth that Democratic politicians seem to just expect Black people to vote for the Democratic Party, with lip service every 4 years and very little tangible results. It's hard to point to the thing that the Democratic Party is doing for Black people. But this is like part of a larger problem that we've been talking about for a long time. It's like, what does the Democratic Party want you to do in the first place? No matter who you are. Vote, donate, go away, be quiet. Don't participate. Don't be part of this. Don't be a part of it. And maybe that's what the Republican Party is offering on a level that the Democrats just aren't, because there isn't a Turning Point USA for the Democrats.
No.
There isn't. I don't even know, like the Proud Boys. I don't know what's the like the parallel mirror world version of that. But
teachers unions.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, but those, and again, like that goes to the part, like the Democratic Party has become the party of the establishment. Teachers unions, you vote with us. We're not going to stop the Department of Education from getting shut down. We're not going to stop people from saying that education system is broken. We're not going to do anything to fight that. Just vote for us. So like there are so many problems that could lead to people drifting away. But again, going to the party that is just bound and determined to shoot itself in the foot and everyone else around them, like I don't understand it, but maybe I should be more empathetic to people who want to burn it all down.
I mean, I do find it interesting that the appeal of being on the outside is still there, after we had a full 4 years of Trump and he won again. And yet it's still this aggrieved brand. But that is the MAGA brand. The MAGA brand is I'm aggrieved. And if they're if they ever finally feel like they're not being, they're not aggrieved, then it might all fall apart, because the underpinnings of it are, I have been forgotten, I have been ignored. And like, I'm not saying there's not some truth to these things. Of course, there's always a kernel and a seed of truth for why they came to be that way. But like that feeling of like, we're the Jesus, just the word dissident, like using it that way really like roiled me. But it also made me realize like that is the core. That's the whole thing. feel like you are the outsider and try your hardest to make sure that you're not anymore, but yet still feel put upon because you can't lose that or you lose the movement.
So this article sort of recontextualized the past several decades for me slightly. And so there's a quote in here. And again, these authors said, we don't have large numbers of people with immediate material experiences that lead them to say, hey, lay off those programs. I need them. They benefit me. And he goes on to say, I interviewed a Black conservative from Milwaukee. He told me they can have the DEI stuff. It has nothing to do with my community. And the writer says some of this language he's parroting, but had there been a more robust connection to people's everyday lives, you would see more people rising up to defend them. And how that recontextualizes the last 50 years or whatever is that sort of since Johnson, the last time we really tried to do some stuff for people with the war on poverty and all the civil rights laws, the left has been able to sort of coast on it. Like they should have kept up the pressure. They should have kept it going. They didn't really so much. They might have feared some backlash. Details are hazy, but we've been able to, with all the hiccups along the way, people have been able to kind of be all right. Right. And what this reminds me of is that is exactly what people are saying about vaccines. And that is exactly, was it Roberts who made the argument about gutting the Voting Rights Act? It was but things have been going so well, so we don't need that anymore. And the counterpoint was right, that's like having an umbrella in a rainstorm and thinking you're not getting wet, so you throw away the umbrella. We're doing that with democracy. We're doing it with these types of laws that were put in place in the middle of the last century because things were absolutely fucking horrible. And so we tried to make it better, and we did to some degree. And then we coasted long enough that people are like, what do we need all this stuff for? Things are good. No one's getting measles, so obviously we don't need vaccines anymore. People can vote, probably, I assume, so we don't need the Voting Rights Act. Democracy seems to be fine, so it doesn't need to be defended, etc.
I'm going to go back to messaging here, because for as much money as the Democratic Party spends on marketing firms and stuff, why don't we have catchy phrases? We are constantly entering debates on Republican terms. We are allowing them to not just create a term, but define it. So DEI, what has that even evolved into? Now how it is utilized is so removed from the context in which it existed to begin with.
Yeah, now it's just the N-word, really.
Yeah, it is. But what is the alternative? What are Democrats messaging as an alternate to saying DEI? I don't really hear anything. I just feel how are you ever going to win a debate if you're entering on their terms?
And that's why we have Chuck Schumer saying he'll fight.
Oh, God.
We'll win. And that's, we're making jokes here, but
not
that's
funny
the Democratic
ones.
Party. Yeah, that's what we're seeing with the Democratic Party, is that they are realizing there's a faction that completely realizes that Chuck Schumer should not be in front of a microphone at any point. And maybe he shouldn't be the head of anything. But the people that could deliver the message are not in positions to deliver the message as the party. AOC will say whatever AOC says. Bernie will say whatever Bernie says. And it's connected directly to them, not to the Democratic Party. Yeah. And that's what's missing right now. And say whatever you want about Trump and the way he messages, but he's good at it. He tricks people. I just saw the Tennessee Holler posted on Blue Sky, my new possibly heroin, which kind of experimenting with, but they just posted a billboard outside of a construction site that says brought to you by the Trump administration, and it's funded by the infrastructure bill that the Biden administration pushed.
Yeah. Oh, I knew they were gonna
signed, and they're already changing signs to say that Trump is delivering this. So that's the messaging that, it's crass. It's it's not true, but Democrats don't even do the true part of the craft. Just take credit for what you do, because
Right.
they'll take credit for the good stuff, whether they did it or not.
Yeah.
And then you're playing
Yeah.
defense constantly.
Right. And yeah, that goes back to like we were talking about a few episodes ago about Biden like never wanting to take credit for anything and like hemming and hawing in interviews. But I did want to go back to this, idea of like a multiracial Republican coalition or or whatnot. I don't truly believe that Republicans are in a quote big tent space that was mentioned in this article yet. I would not say that. I think that's like extremely premature. It's basically like a bridge too far based on the election results that we have. But what I was going to say is that many people in this country think that we're in a post-racial America. That's part of the reason they could get away with gutting the Voting Rights Act, because there's no outrage, because it's like, well, yeah, we fixed a lot of that stuff, right? Like that's not happening anymore. And so much of it happened after Obama was elected because the right just leaned in hard to that talking point. Like, what do you mean racism? Look, we have a Black president. Like that was it's a cliche. It was said so much and so often, right? And so saying we're in a post-racial America just benefits them and allows them to say bonkers things that those of us who understand reality like know cannot be true and will not be true. But you cannot really blame some people wanting to believe that. Even if their personal experiences kind of tell them otherwise, like you cannot blame people for wanting to believe that. Like as a woman, I sometimes want to think that we're not in a like misogynist, sexist society. And then I am, of course, constantly reminded that we are, right? But like it feels better to think that we've really like moved past all of those things and are, on some sort of better trajectory. Like if we're in post-racial America, then Republicans aren't white supremacists. They just like things to be traditional, just like you do, So no abortions and no trans people and no more than two genders and traditional family roles and no more illegal immigration. That's all. It's not about racism because we fixed all that. It's just common sense, right? Just common sense stuff. And so it's so much easier to make those cases and make those arguments if you have tried to make everyone believe that those problems are of the past. We don't have to deal with them anymore.
Coasting.
Meanwhile, they're literally built into our systems.
We've been coasting, and what happens when you coast long enough is you crash. If you're not actively steering, you are headed for disaster. It just depends on if it's sooner or later. So describing quite concisely the state of our politics today, one of these writers says, we're in a situation where we have dysfunctional or non-functional national political institutions. Congress doesn't operate as it was set up to. The Supreme Court is obviously discredited. What you're left with is the executive branch as a battering ram, which, elected every 4 years, can try to push through the sclerosis to meet certain problems or fulfill certain fantasies. And all this takes place in an era of radical wealth inequality. So there's an oligarchic class that runs national politics in both parties anyway. So the case being made here is we have to go back to the basics. Any idea that we're going to defend this crumbling edifice of the liberal state is no longer credible to almost anybody. So we're thrown into a situation where we have to develop solidarity around shared needs, shared suffering, shared vulnerability, and then the possibility of building shared power becomes available. If only the people in charge or, in elected office could see what is so glaringly clear to those of us on the outside, maybe we can make some progress. I mean, what hasn't come up that much? I mean, more than zero, but not yet today. Citizens United created a world in which the people who got elected are amenable to the system that demands they have access to large piles of money in order to get elected, which means those particular people are much less likely to be able to see through the problem that is facing everyone. Like they're not able to see that people don't like billionaires and don't want their politics funded by billionaires because they can't see it themselves. They're like, I'm a good person and I got funded by a billionaire to get elected here. So what's the problem? They cannot see the systemic problem that everyone is so pissed off about. And then you add on the structural problems with how the government is running as just described in that article. And like, of course, the people there are not the answer.
I think I got less hopeful towards the end. And I mean, like, it did feel like, well, we need a complete system overhaul, right? Because like we do have parts of the government that are not responsive to the people. And it feels like often we put little band-aids and we push forward, but I don't know, maybe it's the turn from Biden to Trump and like doing an international look that we're losing relationships because of the inconsistencies that exist term to term based on who sits in the White House, that I'm starting to grasp what the full situation we're in. And that feels very heavy. I think when you look at a system for a long time, my belief was like, we just have to fix it. Like, we just have to make some repairs and do things. And now I feel like I'm looking at it more holistically of like, what would that actually entail? What would having a government that was actually functional for all the people that are living in the United States, and honestly, globally too, because we do impact a lot of outside countries. But like, that feels like a big undertaking for us, again, not having responsive government branches. We're just going to hope a president comes along and it's going to completely restructure our government.
Let me be more hopeful, I think. I think that's what I don't think it's a matter of having hope or not having hope. I think what you're describing is seeing the scale. If you think you have to fix a window, but meanwhile the foundation in your house is completely crumbled, that's depressing. But at least you know that's actually what you have to do. And I think the problem that most of us have had and is just not seeing the scale of the issue. And I think we're starting to see the scale. And yeah, it is daunting. But if you can actually, correctly assess what the problem is and have people that can come up with concrete actions to fix the problem, you can fix the problem. We can do it. It's just not there. There is no quick fix. There's never going to be a quick fix. It's never was going to be a quick fix. And I think that's a huge problem with the Democratic Party, is that they offer some kind of vague prescriptions for the problem, but said that the overall everything's good and it kind of needs to stay the same. Whereas the Republican Party's only quick fixes. Yeah, I got it. Come over here and do this. And it's not going to work, and it's not real. They're going to make things worse, obviously. But if we can be honest about what needs to change, we can move forward. It's, if you don't assess the problem, you can't fix the problem. We're in the assessment phase. And I think a lot of us thought maybe we were further along. We're not. We've got a long way to go. We're kind of at the beginning of fixing this. And I think right now we are suffering through not accurately assessing the problem, and the disease has just gotten worse.
Yeah.
Well, and just to clarify, I think the dauntingness is knowing that we're looking at a plan that has been 50 plus years in the making and feeling like we don't have that same trajectory.
Got to catch up.
I'm patient. Oh, I'm super patient. I can wait 50, 60. I mean, I'll be gone, but like we can wait that time, right? Like I'm perfectly on board with that. I think what I'm like pinpointing, like I don't see the plan. I don't see the person who's being practical, who's having an honest conversation. But I do like your reframing, and that does sound a lot more hopeful than my comment.
Oh, good. Because I laid out these articles thinking that we were going to end on sort of a positive note about having describing the irrefutable consequences of what we've been doing up to this point, opening up the conversation for what we obviously need to do to change. But if I had known that I was going to make Erin sad in the process, maybe I would have included the article that is like just barely on the cutting room floor. Mexico shows how social democratic politics can win and be popular, from
Mhm.
currentaffairs.org. So maybe this is where we'll pick up the conversation next week.
The Republican Party is engaged in a project of convincing you that dictatorship is cool. If they can do that, we can definitely convince people that social justice is a good thing, because what we're selling is better than what they're selling. And I think more of a common sense approach that, you need other people as opposed to one person should be in charge of everything and represents all of us. So we have the winning message. They've just got a 50-year head start on messaging.
I just keep thinking how Kamala started her campaign.
Oh yeah.
How she started it was how we should have
Yeah.
kept going. If
We
you want to
have-
go and see what the messaging was, it's in her speech from Wisconsin when she started her campaign. Everything after that was downhill.
Yeah, you can go back and listen to our show and how we felt.
Yeah,
after,
how
like,
we
hey,
reacted to it. Yeah.
Maybe we're on the right. But
we were
Tim
so
Wall-
excited.
Tim Walz is out there doing that right now.
Mhm.
Maybe, I wish they had let him do it in the first place, but
Right.
we were eventually going to get here with the same kind of approach that inevitably was going to happen with Kamala Harris. Like, if she was president, we'd be on the same Joe Biden track to where 2028, we'd be here now. We're here now. Time to move forward.
Maybe our hopeful note should be from last week, where we pinpointed that before great progress was catastrophic events. So maybe we're just kind of in that awful place right now, and progress is around the corner if we work for it.
Yeah. The classic darkest before the dawn phrase, which is not correct. It is darkest well before the
Right.
dawn. But
Absolutely. Sometimes you got to do a little hopeful self-delusion too.
Yeah.
there we go.
Yeah,
There we
yeah.
go.
I just want to remind everybody about the protest nationwide happening on April 5th, the Hands Off protest, which is organized by a coalition of organizations, including Indivisible and 5051. And you can learn more at handsoff2025.com. And there will be a huge presence in DC, but there are going to be events in basically every major city and even some small towns around the country.
And I think my last thought on this is also comes from this article that we just hadn't gotten to this, but it ties in with something we've been talking about recently. It says that the left needs to offer explanations for what's happening, what the dislocation is, and what can be done about it. And in recent weeks, like unintentionally, but naturally, we've been tying this thread together, going all the way back to, you remember when we latched on to the idea that you shouldn't speak truth to power because power is going to ignore you anyway. You speak truth to the people so that the people have an opportunity to fight against the power. And was it actually on the show when we were talking about the need to go as far as like apologizing? I mean, the Democratic Party went a bad direction, caused a lot of pain, and made a bunch of people angry. We are not going to win those people back. Though, we talked last week about the anti-Clinton haters who like do not mention that man's name in this house sort of people. Like, we're not going to win those people back without some recognition of what was done, where we went wrong, and how we can pivot to do something better. This is why people like Bernie Sanders and AOC get seen as viable alternatives or like representing something that people can latch onto. Because at the moment we have one party that's like at least interested in responsible governance, but doesn't think that anything is wrong and will say to your face, like, everything is great and you should think that everything is great. And then there's the other party that doesn't believe at all in responsible government in any way, but at least they're willing to say that shit's broken and you're right to be angry that things are not working the way you think a government should work. And so ultimately, like, this conversation about a multiracial coalition for Trump, like, I just don't even know that race has anything to do with it. It's like which people are frustrated enough with the status quo that they're willing to take a risk. And that mentality completely spans race in all directions. It's not the path that I think we should go, but I can commiserate with the idea that, like, will someone please admit that shit's fucked up?
Yeah, this is, I mean, we didn't get to it earlier, but what I wrote was, yeah, Republicans picked up significant votes, but the headline has always been how many people stayed home or protest voted from the left. People are abandoning the Democratic Party. You better stop the deluge, stop the leaks before it's too late.
So I think we've probably solved it, but as is so often the case these days, the solution is that we know the path forward. Getting people to follow that path or getting elected people in place who are willing and interested in following that path is a different question altogether. If you have thoughts on how to completely revamp the Democratic Party and save democracy, please let us know. You can leave us a voicemail or send us a text at 202-999-3991. You can send an email to j@bestoftheleft.com or reach us on Signal at bestoftheleft.01. Thanks for listening, and remember that this is really happening, so be decent, act like what you say and do matters, and do what matters most. It is precisely because it comes from personal observations and intuition that research shows common sense is steeped in bias and often leads us astray. Populist leaders like Trump commonly celebrate common sense and attack expertise and evidence. Because obviously.
They say it's just common sense, but it's a veil for their pretense. Bias wrapped in a simple phrase to keep the truth locked in a haze. As they point to the pure and the elite, divide us all, keep us on repeat. But the system's broken, can't you see? It's not just you, it's not just me. Oh, common sense ain't so common when it's used to keep us down. They sell us lies in a shiny package while the world spins round and round. We're tired of the failing structures, tired of the same old dance. Oh, common sense ain't so common, it's just a weapon in their hands. They tell us to trust intuition while they gut every institution. Populists rise, the people cry, but they're sold a dream that's built on lies. They say the elites don't care for you, but their answers don't hold true. It's a game of power, a game of greed, while the working class bleed. Oh, common sense ain't so common when it's used to keep us down. They sell us lies in a shiny package while the world spins round and round. We're tired of the failing structures, tired of the same old dance. Oh, common sense ain't so common, it's just a weapon in their hands. They twist diversity, equity, and inclusion, turn progress into pure confusion. They claim to fight for the forgotten soul, but their promises are sewage in a broken bowl. Congress stalls, the courts betray, the people lose more every day. We need a change, a brand new start, a system built with a beating heart. Oh, common sense ain't so common when it's used to keep us down. They sell us lies in a shiny package while the world spins round and round. We're tired of the failing structures, tired of the same old dance. Oh, common sense ain't so common, it's just a weapon in their hands. So let's rewrite the story, take back control, build a system that feeds the soul. No more lies, no more disguise, we'll rise together, open our eyes. Oh, common sense ain't so common, but the truth is ours to claim. We'll break the chains, rewrite the game, and never fall for their tricks again.